while we were doing our tests, we had this test character that was this stick man running, where we had his legs just doing this little like run thing, and then we could hit hotkeys to have that character independently flip off the camera with each arm.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 468 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's May 16th, 22x4. Before we get started, we have a warning. There will be profanity, swears in this show. We keep it positive, but hey, sometimes you got to use certain words for emphasis. Know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. We know them do.
Yeah, we know that some people got delicate ears. So if you got some of those delicate ears, maybe
put a little lotion on those bad boys.
Do it.
Yeah. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thanks so much for your monthly donations to help keep this podcast going. So this is a bit of a special episode. Okay, we are going to release this episode one day early. Normally our episodes come out on Wednesdays, but we have the Crashlands 2 demo coming out on May 21st, which is a Tuesday, and we thought, hey, let's do a special demo episode to welcome. Like we're linking to the podcast from the main menu of the demo, and so hey. There's a pretty good chance that a lot of people listening this week have never heard us before, never heard a podcast. They don't know much about the game or whatever.
At least so one person,
at least one.
So welcome.
Yeah.
This was for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we thought it'd be kind of cool if we, first off, took a moment to welcome all of our new listeners and new players. Hope you're having a good time with stuff. And for this episode to just kind of do a little retrospective and just talk about the game, talk about Crashlands 2, what it's been like to work on it, why we're making it, what our goals are for the game, where it's at and in production, and let's just dig into it.
A little retrospective, mark the time.
Yeah.
It is a big occasion for us too. This is also the first Next Fest we participated in, even though we've been around for a hot minute. And it's the first demo that we've put out for any of our games. So it's a bunch of firsts happening. And then, of course, it's also the first time that just people get their hands on the game broadly. So it's a lot happening in the feelings.
Yeah.
It's a big moment when it first goes to the people.
The people.
So,
yeah,
I'm very excited about it. Yeah. It's we've been working on Crashlands 2 for so long now. And the whole time, every time we got new cool stuff happen, like the arts get so good and it's like everything keeps getting punched up. Like everything about the game is so delightful and good in my admittedly biased, but I think accurate opinion. And the whole time, every time, like week over week, new cool shit over and over and over again, and the whole time I'm like, God, I just want people to get to see this,
You can't tell anybody.
So for our newer listeners, that's Adam speaking. So he doesn't work directly on the game, right? Yes. So he's our web guy, and he develops lots of tools and tech for us in the studio to help streamline our production. So he is probably one of the less biased members of the team, right? Because he doesn't have his direct hands in working on the game. But yeah, it's easy to look at the game and be like, it looks done, like as you're playing through it and like it feels good, it's working, everything's right. But we have so many more things that we're adding to the game that it's done, but it's not. It feels done, but the game isn't complete. We don't have a full complete narrative experience, and there's still lots more like zones and creatures and stories and characters we're working on. And
that's part of the way that's a different, because we also approach development in a particular way that isn't the same as how everybody else does it, right? And one of our core strategies is to try to be playable and quote unquote launchable at all times. And we don't literally mean like we could just launch it and it would be fun, but we mean that if we just gave the game to somebody, press, a publisher, playtesters, right, that in that moment they should still have a really good experience that feels like they actually just like got a game off the shelf that was ready to go, right? And our goal is to always be as close to that as possible with the parts of the game that currently exist.
Yeah, so a lot of times you'll hear in the game development sphere, you'll hear people talking about these different phases of development, right? There's like these like early prototyping phases, and then there's these like polishing phases and mechanics balancing phases, and then testing phases or whatever. So like Adam was saying, we don't really do that. We do everything more like in layers, where we try to create a complete, polished, finished experience at every step of the way. Because we've also found that it's like something that happened super early in Crashlands 2 development was we had no animations. We were trying to make decisions about certain game mechanics, but some things felt really slow and other things felt really fast. And it felt strange. So we balanced around that. And then once we added animations, the whole game felt totally different. And we had to redo those timings because it just felt wrong, right? So we've kind of learned, you got to polish as you go, make it complete as you go. And so what you'll see in the demo, and even if you played much further than that, the game just keeps going and it feels like a finished game. But at a certain point, it does just run out, right? Because we're not done making it. So
so like your experience, if you had more access to what you're given in the demo, so if you're playing the demo, you start hitting those boundaries, right? If you're actually able to go past this, but there's actually a lot of still kind of finished game that's beyond the boundaries of the demo, because we're giving you just that early glimpse, so you would actually be able to keep on playing if we didn't block you for another, 10 hours or whatever, like a pretty solid amount of time. Yeah. And then at that point, you would kind of go into the next part of the world, and you'd have this really weird experience where everything feels polished and done, except just nothing's going on. Like you'll move into a space and you'll go to like talk to a character. The character just got nothing to say. Yep. And it started, so it kind of peters out, but it's like polished the whole time.
Yeah. So let's kind of zoom out and think back to sort of like the impetus for us making this game and talk about, kind of where it came from. So obviously Crashlands 2 is a sequel to Crashlands. We launched Crashlands over 8 years ago. It came out in January of 2016. Yep. Not even another 2020, it's 2016. And we started working on it in 2013 in November. Mm-hmm. So before we made Crashlands, we were making much smaller mobile games. So our most successful game up to that point was a game called Quadrupus Rampage, which is a free-to-play kind of roguelike mobile brawler, which took us about 3 months to make. Like we just kind of slammed stuff together real fast, and we had essentially like no money, and it was just Sam and me working on stuff at the time. And it was kind of like, this is like, we have to make a game in 3 months. That's just what has to happen, or it's over, right?
And that game is very fun, and it is still up on.
It's still up, and it still holds up.
Yep.
And after that game, we were kind of moving on to our next like dumb, goofy, smallish mobile game. And at that time, Sam got a cancer diagnosis, which was a very bad one, a very low prognosis. And we just totally shifted gears because we're like, if you think, it makes you think about your legacy, right? Of like, what am I doing here?
It's not even necessarily legacy so much as like just the presentness. Do you want to spend your present time working on something that is like a thing that you're like, we're just making it
like a free-to-play game.
Yeah,
do you want to spend your last days on Earth thinking about how to monetize your apps, the store in your mobile game?
And I was like,
come on,
literally. So I whipped up like just a real garbage prototype of it was essentially a Roomba that you controlled that picked up leaves, and after it picked up 10 leaves, it turned into shoes. And I was like,
Sam was like, this is crafting. This is a crafting game.
Like, listen, I have this idea for this crafting game that puts all the stuff together that all this you got like your Terraria-esque pieces. You got like Diablo shit. You got Skyrim-y storytelling, and then just like goofiness. Just smoosh it all together. We could do that. Plus, I might be dead, so you can't say no. And so that was sort of that was my technique. That's a very effective pitching technique.
It works.
It's very effective. I would recommend getting cancer to pitch your idea, but
it helps. It helps to convince people of things, if nothing else. Yep. So we worked on that game, and we had a totally different development style at that time, out of necessity and out of we just didn't have any options. Like we were really new to all this stuff. And also, we were using GameMaker at the time, and we still do, but GameMaker was a lot less capable as an engine back then as well. And so just kind of the scope of things that we could achieve was dramatically smaller than what we can do now, and we just didn't have time to research other ways to do stuff. So Crashlands 2 dev was really just like, just go, just move, just keep jamming stuff into this game as fast as you can, and we'll just make it work. And so there were moments where like Sam was in the hospital getting his chemotherapy, and he was just isolated there. And I had a phone call with him. And I'm like, all right, what do you need? And he's like, I just need you to give me some planting seeds added to the game so that I can grow a garden in Crashlands while I'm in my hospital bed. Right. So I was like, done. I'm going to do it. And so, I just all day I just worked on that, and then I brought it in on my phone, and I was like, here you go. Right. And it's like, I was like, cool. Like that was what it was like to work on Crashlands.
Yeah, it was kind of a lot.
So,
a
It
weird
was
time.
a lot. And also it was Sam and me out of the gate, and Adam finished up his PhD as Sam and I were starting work on Crashlands. And then Adam,
you guys were like 6 months in, because
we were about 6 months in.
Yeah, I think you joined about a year in. Yeah,
because I joined in this. So I defended my dissertation in end of the school year 2014, and joined like in the summer, basically like right after that.
Yeah. So, and that was, again, one of those clarifying things where like Adam had been kind of struggling with like reconciling his desire to do real science with the realities of what it's like working in academia, which is,
it's a lot of bullshit.
It's a lot of bullshit. It's not really that much about the science. There's a lot of politics and fundraising and everything else. And, there's a whole discussion about that, but anyways, it wasn't great. So Adam was, again, kind of like when Sam and I were deciding like, do we want to just be working on these like free mobile games and just working on like monetizing stores and putting ads and shit? Or do we want to try to like do something that really is meaningful to us and to other people? Yeah. So in Adam's case, it was kind of like, I don't know how much longer my brother has. And also I don't, my experience with academia has been pretty not great, and I'm going to go do something that really matters to me. So Adam came and joined the studio, and we didn't even know what to do with him at the time, and neither did he. And he just kind of became our web guy. He found a spot and just slotted himself in there. Yeah. And it worked. So we worked on Crashlands with just the three of us, and we launched it in January 2016. So it took like 2 years and 3 months or something like that. Yeah. To put together. And it got front page featuring. It got runner up at the Dice Awards for Mobile Game of the Year, getting beaten by Pokemon Go. That was very somehow
surreal. And Mario Run, maybe, or there was some other. We were juxtaposed against Mario Run.
I think Clash Royale also was out at that time. Yeah, like it was kind of a banger of a year for like popular mobile games, and the fact that we were even on the list was crazy. Yeah. So that was super cool, and it was like there's so many crazy things from that time. Like I remember, so we had this really cheap old Mac Mini that we were using to make our iOS builds. It was slow as shit. And it was one of the desktop ones where like you got to plug a monitor into it. So like when we were even launching the game, when we were deploying and like working like around launch day, like I brought my setup over to Sam's apartment, and we had the Mac Mini, and I brought my big monitor and basically like set that up so that I could make Mac builds, because we couldn't afford a MacBook because MacBooks are for some reason $1 million. And literally, like as soon as like we started seeing the sales numbers coming in through Apple to the Apple like back end, I was like, all right, just drove over to the Apple store, bought a MacBook that day. Yep. I was like, I put it on the credit card. Like we only got $500 in the bank, right? So,
but we're about to have more than that.
But we're about to have more than that, and so I could put it on the credit card, and we could just deal with it. Because oh my god, like. An hour and a half to make a Mac build or to make an iOS build. Yep. Oh, terrible. Yep. Not to mention lugging around my entire desktop setup just to make a deployment, So that's kind of where we started. And then we spent most of 2016 continuing to work on Crashlands because we had gone so fast with our development and we had so little time, right? there were so many bugs, so many like our first patch of Crashlands was the quality of life patch. We're like,
if you watch that trailer,
we added.
You see at the end, you remember that we fucking spun the patch notes through, which we'd handwritten, of course, but like I'm pretty sure we wiped the patch notes really fast, and it's like we fixed so many things.
So many things.
That was also when we added controller support, right? Because we didn't have
controller support. Patch? Controller support wasn't there until like November of 2016 because it took over 3 months to add it because again, everything was just jammed in there, right? Like nothing in the game was really set up to handle any of that. So one of the big lessons we learned from that is there's a speed limit to making games, and you can break the speed limit, but some things you're gonna
pay for
crash
somewhere, right?
Pay for it. And it's
pieces are gonna fly off.
Yeah, if the game is successful, you'll pay for it kind of the whole time because every shortcut you take makes your life harder all the time. But if the game if the game ends up not being successful, then you're in a kind of a better spot because then you're not gonna. There's not worth doing anything to it. It's not worth making updates. Not worth doing anything, right? And so you get to kind of just like cut it off there. But if the game actually allows your studio to survive and is successful, you're going to need to do some updates.
Yeah.
Even if it's just to keep it running on some platforms, right? And if you were taking shortcuts the whole time you were in there, and again, but sometimes you just have to, right? Then, oh shit, you really pay for that on the other
so
side.
we kind of joke that like Crashlands actually took 3 years to make. We just launched it 2 years and 3 months in.
We launched it into early access.
It was a finished game, but finished is... Yeah. It had some sharp edges, and rough, So, anyways,
but it's still like it. I think it's one of the remarkable things about Crashlands is I think because of how important it was to us that even though it had that roughness to it, it really struck a chord with people instantly. And that was before we rounded out all the rough edges over the following 6 months to a year, or whatever.
So after Crashlands came out, then like I was saying, we worked on it a bunch. We also learned a lot about like hiring people, expanding the studio, and we kind of learned that our ad hoc, chaotic, just do random stuff as fast as possible work process is pretty good for us.
It doesn't work when you scale beyond.
But as soon as you add people who need to know what the fuck is going on and need to know what you need them to do and, just regular stuff like that you need in a workplace.
I wouldn't say it was good for us. It was something we could get away with.
It's just what we did. That's just how we were doing things. And so we had a lot of growing pains when it came to figuring out how do you hire people? Who do you hire? How do you why do you even hire? Like we hired for all the wrong reasons. We were thinking that it's kind of a magic bullet where it's like, we just need more art. If we just hire an art, if we just need more code, we just hire a programmer without really thinking of to do what specifically and how will they go about doing it? And what are your actual bottlenecks? Because if you hire people to do more stuff, but the people already doing that stuff are struggling to get that stuff done because there's a bottleneck somewhere and they can't get their things added to the game or whatever. You're just creating more problems for yourself and not solving anything, right? So
I think it's sort of the same tack. We're reading all the books and stuff. It's not like we were trying to, and we talked to other studios at this point. People
we read a million management books and
so we talked to a lot of people. A lot of people who've been far more successful than us. I think one of my favorite moments was in GDC the year after Crashlands. I think it was Adam and I got to go to the Supergiant, invited us over to their studio just to hang out with them and some other devs.
It felt like we were at the cool kids table.
I know. I was like, I feel so cool
because it was but also because at that party it was the people from Clay were there. It was basically people from all of the big indies.
Yeah, you're just like,
oh yeah, right.
All these people are in the room. You're like, whoa, weird.
Why am I here?
Who allowed this?
It's not an imposter syndrome so much as just it just feels weird.
Yeah.
It
is also that.
I think it might. Yeah, it definitely is to a degree, but it's also there's a reality there, which is Crashlands did well, but it didn't do Supergiant well. You know what I mean? So it is that.
There's an order of magnitude level of success that we still have never hit.
Oh yeah, it's like a D-list celebrity showing up at an A-list party, being like, "Hello." So that was a very there's a lot of special stuff that happened in that time while we were simultaneously actually probably having a really bad time actually in terms of we could not get a game out. We were just struggling internally trying to.
We had a lot of.
We had like 3 projects that we started and threw away.
Yeah. Constantly refactoring.
The whole studio 2017 was kind of the year of making a series of production mistakes and then throwing lots of work away, trying to figure out how to be a studio with employees and how to efficiently move forward on a project like that. So eventually we got our shit together and we started working on Levelhead in 2018, and we got an office. Which we started all working in the same building together, which had never really happened. Like we were in my basement of my house for a while. Like it was just kind of startup chaos. You know what I mean? So Levelhead was a pretty interesting game. It took us about 2 years to put together. And the goal with that one was we were like, well, for starters, we had this belief that because we were able to send out newsletters and like reach out to our players through our Butterscotch ID system, that people would be fans of the studio. And if we released another game sort of like in the same universe, it's like in the same IP, like lore universe as Crashlands, that Crashlands players would be like, oh, hell yeah. And they would come check it out. But the genre of Levelhead was a platformer builder. So kind of in the vein of Mario Maker, right? Which is a totally different kind of a game.
It doesn't make sense to call genres opposite, but as far as like things could be opposite in the genre space.
There's a gulf between them, right? So it's not like you're leveraging. I think the error we made was saying like, oh, there's a lot of indie studios who make different games, right? They're like totally different games in different universe or whatever else. And oftentimes we would look at Supergiant as a good example. We're like, oh, like totally different game, moment to moment. But the reality was that like the core of the game, the genre actually is basically fixed. And you can see when they deviate from the genres where they have the least success, right? It's like you're building up actually like a genre-based fan base that is a big fan of your stuff, but it's like, in their case, it's these kind of action, the particular kind of isometric action-y games, right? All sorts of different angles on that, all sorts of different flavors of it, but they all end up being that to some degree. And when they deviate from that, they have less success. Like something like Pyre, for example, which is more like a weird sports soccer game. And everyone's like, I don't really know. It looks kind of similar, but it's like kind of weird. And I think
and of course, like a lot of people still bought it.
Oh yeah, again, it actually hewed close enough that I think they managed to pull it off, right? Far better than we did.
But Supergiant also is a special case. This is why you always have to be careful which case studies that you pick as a reference when you're trying to make decisions, right? Yeah. And Supergiant, not a good choice because they are stellar. They've been around for a long time. They have a huge fan base. And that fan base is actually willing to take risks on a diversified portfolio if it's a Supergiant game. It's kind of like Blizzard, where to an extent at least, like if Blizzard launches a game, fuckloads of Blizzard players who play other Blizzard games will at least give it a try, right?
Give it a try, yeah.
Because they're, at least historically, because they're like, oh, that's a Blizzard game. It's like
quality levels.
It's got to be good.
Well, because it's also built on trust, right? Yeah. And like nowadays, Blizzard's struggling with that.
As a whole,
Supergiant is not right. Supergiant,
Supergiant, and so, but just because like, as a newer studio, if you've got one game that people like, you still don't have the cred, right? Like you don't have the trust of like an established track record. So if you say like, oh, we made this one game that you like, now we've made a completely different game that's nothing like it. Do you want to check it out? And people will be like, I mean, no.
Yeah, right? I think the mistake was not realizing that people want to play people are coming to you to play a certain kind of game, right? And so if you manage to find an audience, if you're lucky enough in indie space to actually find an audience, then you want to make stuff actually that is for them, which means you do need to hew somewhat close, at least like genre-wise, to whatever it was that brought them there in the first place. And we were just like, no, fuck that, Mario Maker. And so we did that.
So we hubrised real good. And,
it seemed like a hole in the market, to be fair, like from a,
that was our goal. Yeah.
Yeah. It hadn't come out. Mario Maker 2 hadn't come out yet. Hadn't even been announced. Didn't seem like it was going to be happening because they were still doing some updates for Super Mario Maker. So we were like, it seems like we got at least maybe another 2 years, something like that, before that's going to happen. And then it happened early, out of nowhere. They sort of just were like, I think in January or February of 2019. So we've been working on Levelhead for like a year and some change. And they were like, Mario Maker's coming out in like 4 months.
2 months.
And we were like, I guess we are going into early access in 3 months then. So maybe someone will pay attention to it. And that didn't quite work.
Yeah. And so what kind of happened over the course of Levelhead was like, there are a million things that I'm so proud of from Levelhead.
It's a great game.
It's got still, I think, a 97% positive on Steam. So, like, for the people who like that kind of a game, it nails it. And also, like, we had to learn so much about actual good development practices and production practices because we did have a larger team, and we had goals to get this game in as many places as possible. So that means lots of languages, lots of platforms, lots of control schemes. So we launched it on 7 different stores with 12 languages on the same day, just all at once. And because we had also like gotten a QA team and we were like routinely testing, like, unlike in the original Crashlands, we didn't have a QA team. And we didn't have time to test everything because we had to make the game. And if we tested everything while making it,
takes an hour and a half to make just by itself.
Yeah, the build alone takes an hour and a half. Yeah, and I can't use my computer while the build is happening. So it's like, all right, we'll make a build one day a week or something. So we learned a lot over the course of Levelhead, and we expanded our capabilities to the point where we were able to make a stable game that was expandable into tons of different parts of the world and different control schemes and all that, just right out of the gate. And it didn't go very far, Yeah. So, which is fine because, like, again, like we talked about, it's a great game. Sometimes you just miscalculate what the market wants,
And the reason it was fine for us and didn't nuke the studio is because we'd had a handful of good business deals and partnerships leading up to that.
And Crashlands was still making money.
And Crashlands was still making money. So basically, there were much bigger enterprises that took the risk on Levelhead with us because every game launch is a risk, right? And so we got to absorb the fact that it just didn't blow up the way that we needed it to.
Yeah, you basically had 4 years of total dev time there, even though there's just one game coming out, right? We were working on it for the whole time.
Yeah, because the thing about games, is that every game launches. Especially if you're a small studio that can only make one game at a time, every game launch, all the money that comes in from that has to now support your whole team through the next X years until you can get the next game out, right? So game development is a weird space because you get spikes of income and then you have to smooth it out over a really indeterminate period of time where you don't know what's going to happen.
4 or 5 years or something.
Yeah. So like Sam was saying, we launched Crashlands 1 in 2016. We launched Levelhead in 2020. We hadn't started working on Levelhead until 2018, right? Mm-hmm. But the money that was coming in for that initial launch of Crashlands in 2016, because most of the money we ever made off the game came in the first, 6 months or a year of that. Mm-hmm. And it still did okay from then on and kind of kept things afloat, but at a ever decreasing kind of a rate, And so that's why these things are so risky, because if you spend this time
or
some of it flailing,
blow
up your team size, your costs go way up. Like if you do all this stuff and then you chew up all of your runway doing that, and the next launch isn't enough to give you a few more years to do the next thing and start all over again, then that's it. That's the end of the.
Surviving in the indie space is brutal, right? You don't have a lot of eggs in baskets to fling around, like you're publishing stuff and all that. So, but I think what was interesting though with Levelhead is that it was sort of, I think to me, it was sort of our studio's maturation period, right? Where it went from like, we're just like 3 dumb brothers who are like a little too clever, and then we could do whatever we want, and then into, we do like pretty hardcore DevOps and stuff. We're extreme about quality and process improvements and efficiencies and identifying bottlenecks and all this stuff now that like none of these things conceptually were in just nowhere near my brain pan sort of during that entire period. I was
and the reality was we couldn't have made Crashlands 2 at the time. We didn't, because we needed that growing up period on something. We needed to do that with something, right?
Something
and
else.
It could have been Crashlands 2, but if we had tried to do it then, I don't think we would have made it. I think we would have.
It would have been way, way too similar to the first Crashlands because
would have been flailing too hard.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting though is that the day Levelhead launched, so you were talking about how the day Crashlands launched, we start seeing some of the numbers come in, and some of that data is updated hourly. Some of it actually is like kind of the day after stuff. The day after Levelhead launched, so I waited because we had all these stores, and I looked through all of them, and I saw like just the raw sales coming in, and I got so mad because I was like, you think about it, like you spend 2 years working on something, and really like you're working your buns off, right? This isn't like a casual fucking thing. This is your livelihood.
This is your whole life, yeah.
And in my case, making the art, right? So you're making the thing that people see, and oftentimes then initialize that choice of if they're gonna go for it or not, right? Or get them interested.
Yeah, that's something we talk about a lot. Is that marketing a game and convincing people to buy it isn't so much about all the mechanics and how fun the game is, whatever. It's about what it seems like when people look at the trailer, when people look at the promo art. Like is it convincing enough visually and aesthetically for people to gamble on whether it's actually fun, right? Yeah. And so that's why Sam was kind of like feeling raw.
Oh yeah, I was like, well, also because I think from a design standpoint, there were the constant comparisons to Mario Maker 2, which did come out and did blow it out of the water. But our players oftentimes were coming from Mario Maker 2. I mean, they were like, that's sort of why they liked that kind of game, right? And they would always just be like, wow, like mechanically, this Levelhead has just got so much clever stuff in it. It has so much fun space. I mean, you can literally build working calculators and stuff. And like, there's a Rickroll that someone made in the game that like plays the song.
Yeah.
And be like,
the stuff the players have done in that game are truly.
Oh, it's crazy. I think that was the combo of being like, we made something that is really good and that stands up to something that is on that level of like, fucking Nintendo's Super Mario Maker 2, right? But it didn't matter. And I got so mad, like on a core.
But also conceptually, like some stuff we kept hearing from, like when we were reaching out trying to promote the game was, for example, streamers or YouTubers would say, especially those who actually play Mario Maker, like these are the perfect people to play because they play this type of game, right? Yep. And time and time again, we heard the same thing, which is I literally can't play games other than Mario Maker because YouTube or Twitch won't show my stream to people, right? So
I'll take
it'll like the algorithm only surfaces Mario content, and if I make anything else, I just lose money, right? And so it did, like it kind of hit a point where it didn't matter how good the game was or anything. It's just it didn't have Mario in it, and therefore it was just a non-starter because we were just bumping up against that turf.
Well, that territory. Ultimately,
right?
That was the mistake that we made when we thought we had noticed a hole in the market. Yeah, which was we thought there was a hole in the market that basically we thought that Mario Maker had basically created this niche in the market of people who want to make and share levels for like a complex, interesting platformer, right? And we're like, but this thing is even ignoring the fact that Mario Maker 2 hadn't come out and so on, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It was still only on Nintendo, even though Mario Maker 2 did come out during
it only ever would
it did,
right?
But only ever would be on Nintendo. Yeah. So we were like, so in our minds, we were like, on the one hand, if we can get something out before Mario Maker 2 comes out, and then on the Switch, then like the home of Mario Maker now, like we get to be there first. We get to fill in that hole.
Take it. Yeah, swoop in and take it.
Yeah, but even outside of that, we had the belief that if Mario Maker 2 did came out on Switch, right, that would just further grow the market for games like that, for other places where that game didn't live, right? But what we just didn't understand at the time was that Mario Maker wasn't a niche for building platform level games, right? That's not what it was. It was a Mario game first. And so its niche was you, the player who loves Mario.
Get to make your own Mario levels.
Make your own Mario levels, right? And so we misjudged what that niche was. And you can see this because there are a lot of other games too that try to do similar kind of like level building kinds of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And very few of them
have been that successful.
Have found very much success there.
And you can also see how like I mentioned Pokemon Go earlier, right? So Pokemon Go was made by a company that had an almost identical game out that just did fine. It was called Ingress, I think. Yep. And they got hired by the Pokemon company to basically make just like a Pokemon version of that game. And suddenly it's making billions of dollars.
One of the biggest games in the world.
Yeah. So again, it's like, it's not like the game is just as good as it ever was. It's the same concept, same mechanics, same company, same everything. But just by taking that super, super powerful IP and slapping it in there, that's what actually gets people to notice it.
Yeah. So which was ultimately the lesson, right? We were like, okay, well, our most successful IP is Crashlands, right? Mm-hmm. So we sort of realized we're like, okay, we can't just
do whatever.
We can't just do whatever and bank on the fact that if we make something good and we have a trustworthy studio sort of name so that so that publishers, business partners, and players all like, well, they'll see what we're doing and be like, well, we trust that you're going to do it well, so we'll take a risk, right? It was realizing that wasn't true enough. That is still true to an extent, but it's not true enough.
I think it's sort of like on a very, very high level. It's basically saying that the core design of your game can be totally perfect, airtight, but that does not actually equate to providing an experience that people want to have, right?
Yep.
Even if it is literally the same experience as, say, the branded version of that content, right? Pokemon.
Well, importantly, it's not about people; it's about a lot of people because it's just a volume game, right?
Because there were a lot of players of Levelhead, like right. It was on Game Pass. We had at least 200,000 players just on Game Pass alone, just the first week, right? Like,
again, if you look at our Discord, like it's so active, it's ridiculous as far as like all the Levelhead players hanging out.
Yeah, like for the people who it's for, it's amazing. Oh yeah, but it's just not. It's not for enough people.
Frankly, they gave me so much. They gave me so much, energy back. Frankly, after all that, because it was just this confirmation. Like we did make a really, really good thing, for people. And these people were just enjoying the shit of it. And you look at people's reviews that have like 1,000 fucking hours or whatever. And it's like,
and the Levelhead community is still amazing and still great. It's small and tight knit, right? But it's still great. And
it gives us life.
Yeah, and that's kind of the core of it is when you're doing this for a living and you need to pay people's salaries, and all that kind of stuff. Scale of success looks really different than if you're like a solo indie doing it part-time, where just kind of making any money is a signal of success, right? In our case, we got to pay salaries and health insurance, 401ks and all this kind of stuff. And the scale of success that you need to do that, even for a small team, even without outrageous salaries, right? It's huge. You got to sell a lot of fucking copies of games. Yeah. And despite the fact that Levelhead, again, it's had hundreds of thousands at least players to this point, right? Mm-hmm. It's a lot of players, but the actual like conversion into enough revenue to fund the studio just wasn't there.
Yeah, just continuous interest just wasn't there. So I coming off of that, I was feeling pretty fucking raw.
It was a low time. Yeah.
And literally the day after, I just was like, fuck everyone. I'm going to make something that like no one ever gets to ignore. I'm not going to make shit anymore that people are going to ignore. I'm just so over this. And like, it's a sort of spite can be a fantastic motivator. You know what I mean? Things like that. Spite driven, that initial, man, like I was thinking about just the other day, actually, like just this last week, my wife and I were talking about it a little bit, because that initial rush for me, like the energy that I had the first 6 months or so, because I was basically, everybody else had pivoted to continue working on Levelhead. And we were finishing
some content updates and
doing some brand new content stuff. And so my artwork on that was actually very limited. I think I maybe did like a month of stuff. And then I was kind of off for like 5 months, just like doing a shitload of research, reading up on stuff, trying to cobble together something that was a effective enough sequel design, but with a very different focus than like how we had thought about Levelhead in terms of being like business case. It was just like, how do you make something that people look at and they just say, I want it. And I'm not convincing anybody of anything anymore. Like I'm not putting bullet points up to be like, look at these features we have. Or like, we have more features than that game has that you play. I don't give a shit. Like if you need to just look at it and be like, I want that. I don't want to talk to your brain. I want to talk to your gut. I'm over this. I'm so over it. And so that was a hard switch for me too, because I'd also just started taking my art more seriously, which is a funny thing to say at that point. But like this was around the same time, and so that was a very intense while for me personally.
And honestly, people can respond to situations like that in different ways, right? Because in a way, Sam, it seems like you kind of blamed yourself for people not being that psyched about Levelhead or whatever. Because like you're saying, visuals are such a huge component of whether a game is appealing to people.
Yeah,
right?
Again, like the higher level theme or the higher level fantasy really resonating with people, and just kind of like missing that mark, I think just kind of drove me insane, because it's just like this. I think it was also the experience internally of all the transformation the studio had undergone, right? And we're still like a very small team. So we were, I think at the height of Levelhead, we were 6 people.
Yeah.
And then now we're 8.
Because we had
So it's
there were the 3 of us, and then Sure, who's been with us since since our first round of trying to scale the studio. So he does all of our platform management stuff, runs the automated system that builds all the games. He does all kinds of stuff related to that. And then we had Sampy came on to do admin stuff full time. And then,
which included getting 800 screenshots of Levelhead uploaded.
There was
to
some labor intensive shit
Yep.
that she had to do. And then Jordan, who was he wasn't our first QA person we hired peer, because we were experimenting with like part-time QA and stuff.
Yeah.
But he was one of the very first that we experimented with. He was great. We trusted him. And so we're like, hey,
full time.
QA is proving that we needed to have this all along, as a thing. So we brought him in full time. So we basically added. So we'd already had Sure the whole time, but then we'd added 2 more people during Levelhead.
Yeah, and then we've added another 2 since. So again, the team's still extremely small.
We added 3 since.
I had 3.
Because we got Jen, and we got Carl, and we got Anne.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on a contract.
Yeah, I keep miscounting as well, because I keep forgetting, like, not just like who we have, but just the number.
Yeah. It is like we have 1 more than it is than for me being able to be confident that I've listed everybody anytime I'm like doing
Yeah,
we have it at 10.
Which is
As soon as
cool.
it's 10, I feel like it's easier to remember. But if it's 8 or 9, you're like,
yeah, it's
You're like somewhere
somewhere in there. But
small team.
I think the team is still tiny, relative to the overall scope of the industry and how big these things can get. And I think part of it then too is just like, recognizing that there's just a lot of people depending on like us to make good decisions. You know what I mean? And so I think I wanted to walk into whatever we were doing next, feeling like I had really kind of burnt down the previous mental model of how I was thinking about stuff and really tried to ingest stuff and think about it in a very different way. And so I think it was like in October, maybe, we got to sit down with the kind of
2020
of 2020, with the whole team and present I remember I put together like a deck, and I was like, here's the idea of what we're going to do. Is it good? And I remember the first thing I remember was that I remember you leaned back and you're doing your like eyebrow thing. You go, this sounds really cool, but we literally can't build this. Do you remember that?
Yep.
Was it?
That's my answer to most things that you said.
Was this a Crashlands 2 pitch at that time, or was this a pitch for something else?
This is the Crashlands 2 pitch.
So you basically had pitched your vision of what Crashlands 2 was.
Yeah, after kind of going away and holding up more so while you guys were busy with stuff. And
Sam came back with a huge design document the size of the Bible,
it's like, here's the idea. And the response was like an excited thing, but then also like, literally we can't. I don't know. This does sound cool if we, I don't know.
Which, to be clear, isn't a no. It's if we're gonna make this thing, we have a lot of questions to answer and a lot of tech to develop. So that was what we started doing, right? So it was in the first like couple of months of the game, it was just trying to, and also like there were some fundamental changes to Game Maker and how that worked right at that time. And
really good changes that we desperately needed, but still it made it so that Seth had been used to, doing everything in Game Maker a particular way. He suddenly had access to new, again, really good, important tools, but it required reworking his whole mental model of like, how do you make games in Game Maker? Because it was so fundamentally different.
And lots of compatibility stuff, because we've developed a huge a code library over time that helps us in producing our games. Well, now that library isn't really compatible with the new stuff that we have. And so there was like lots of jank there and conversion steps and stuff. And we also started experimenting with a whole new art pipeline where Sam switched over from Inkscape over to Clip Studio Paint and Spine. Because we also said, like, up until that point, Sam would make art assets either frame by frame or in pieces, and then he would have to send them over to me as the programmer with instructions of like how to put it into the game.
And they were getting more elaborate,
so
over time as I was getting better. And so like Levelhead, Jerry Tina has like 30 something frames per power up, and there's like 6 of those. So I'd have to be like, here's the breakdown. Here's how you should time it. for stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it just hits this point where it's like, if every art asset that goes into the game, takes me as the programmer a day and a half to code up all the animations, it's just not sustainable, right? Like there's just no way, because now Sam's waiting around for stuff. He has a terrible feedback loop. We've got this backlog of things that just aren't getting created. So we had all these pipeline problems. And so we thought, well, if we can use Spine, which Game Maker does support, it's a 2D animation tool that you can use with bones and stuff like that. If we could use that, then Sam could animate and do everything himself, and then just kick the finished thing over to me, and then I could just be like, play animation, slap, right, and then it just goes, right. So we had a lot of research to do into figuring out just what it meant and how we were going to go, because it's just a tool, and you could use it in 1,000 different ways, and many of them would be a bad idea, right? And so we had to learn a lot about the implications of that, and we also had to learn about shaders, which is a way of modifying how things look by manipulating the pixels and colors and stuff like that. Which we had a little bit of work with that in the past, but again, it was one of those like this is part of the tech for making a game beautiful.
Yep,
and
I want to talk.
Can't ignore it.
Yep, I want to talk to your gut. If the first screenshots that someone sees of this, I need at least some portion of people to be like, "Yep, I need it.
I want it.
Put
I
it in my
want
body."
it. Yep.
Yep.
So we spent a lot of time in those first couple of months just doing experiments with all of that. We might even I don't think it's in the game files anymore, but we had this test Spine character. Which when we were testing multi-track animations, because we were like lots of experiments with trying to figure out a way to like independently animate the upper body and lower body to try to like do stuff while Flux was running and all that. And no matter what we did, it just looked real bad. It was weird.
Big, yeah, it was hideous.
So we ended up landing on the model where like while you're performing abilities that have animations, you plant to do it. So that's where we landed with that. But while we were doing our tests, we had this test character that was this stick man running, where we had his legs just doing this little like run thing, and then we could hit hotkeys to have that character independently flip off the with each arm.
Well, we also did test all sorts of stuff. It was like, what does it mean? Because we were trying to figure out Flux has armor, right? It's like you're putting on different armor pieces in the first game. And we're like, we're obviously going to have different, you're not going to put on like a whole suit at once. Like that's weird. So like, how do you do how the fuck do you do that? Especially if we want to actually animate stuff instead of have it just be like, Flux does not animate actually, like truly in the first game. It's just
rotations
limbs, but there's no change in the underlying body form, right?
Yeah, it's like if we want to put armor on Flux in the first game, like we're like in code, it's just like draw her body here, and then if she has armor on, it's like also draw that armor piece on top
exactly
of it. That's exactly the same spot. That's it. That's the whole thing.
So if it's like, okay, you want to punch up the graphics, I was like, well, I want to actually animate this character instead of having them just be a straw man,
with no knees and no elbows.
Yeah, no knees, no elbows. So if I do that, how do you put on like some gloves and have that?
And the answer is you need to redraw the same pair of gloves like 8 or 12 or 15 different times in different poses and angles and stuff.
Map them onto some new slots and stuff in Spine and do all. So one of the tests we did early was like, okay, if we're gonna have to do that, we're gonna have a lot of slots. What happens if you just have a lot of slots? Is it gonna break everything? How many slots can we have?
Yeah, so we had to do some stress tests.
Like 1,000 pelvises.
We made a character with 1,000 pelvises just to see what would happen, and it worked okay. Like it didn't make the game explode. We're like, okay, so we can have a character, at least your player character, with lots and lots of visual slots to change what's showing here and there, right?
So this was
and there's all these weird challenges with that too, like blinking. How do you make this character blink? Like with this new, so suddenly we found ourselves having to just reinvent everything that we had taken for granted in terms of how to just get stuff looking the way we want in the game.
And I think actually this is kind of important if we kind of zoom out a little bit on this, because this is this R&D phase where we're trying to figure out how to do this kind of stuff, right? And this is a lot of why it takes so long to make video games, is because the people involved are going to try to do something new, right? Mm-hmm. And there are a few ways to get at that. One is you can say like, okay, there are existing solutions to these kind of problems. So we can go just try to like find materials to learn about it. Or you can say there are people out there who've already done the same work that we're just about to set out to do, to try to like do the experiments, learn how to do stuff, come up with techniques, right? So we'll just go try to find a person and hire them to basically like
do your
skip that step, skip the step of them learning how to do it, and just say, whatever your techniques are that you figured out that work, come in, do those techniques. And then maybe on our team, we would then, you know, learn and adopt those and spread that knowledge. Right. But this is one of those like pieces of doing this stuff as a business, of making those decisions about, do we do the R&D to ourselves, figure this out, to train up our own people? Do we hire other people who supposedly already know how to do it? That has its own set of risks and, you know, complications. What do you do? And since our strategy has always been try to stay as small and self-contained as we can and try to just constantly improve our processes and the skills of everybody on the team, then we always opt for that approach when we think we can, right? Of figure it out.
Learn it ourselves.
Yeah, figure it out. And also, there are a lot of benefits to that. Also, again, lots of risk, but a lot of benefits. Mostly that we get to continue to reinforce and develop our particular approaches to all of the things that we do, rather than trying to say, let's take a pre-existing way of solving this huge set of problems that, while, yeah, it does exist, it doesn't exist within our way of thinking, within our existing game structure and that kind of stuff.
The fit is never 100%, right?
Yeah. So now the new challenge becomes, how do we make this work in this context, rather than how do we make a thing new in the context of what we're working on. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of our initial goal was partially that of just punch up everything visually as much as possible. So that, and it's been very strange because, you know, it feels like Crashlands. Like if you play the first Crashlands and then you play Crashlands 2, you're like, wow, this really feels like Crashlands. But then if you go back and play Crashlands after playing Crashlands 2, you're like, what is this? Like this is nothing like that, you know, because the level of fidelity is just ramped up so fucking much now.
I was real mad. That's all. Yeah.
Sam
was enraged.
Use that spite for good, you know.
Channel that. He hulked out real good.
That's for a good 2 years, I think.
Yeah. So that was where a ton of our early time went, and we also had a bunch of goals about trying to address some of the like complaints or shortcomings or whatever about the first game, which is like, for example, people were like, you know, I want my home base to really feel more like a home base and not just like a bunch of walls laying around, right?
Flat
and
walls.
So we were like,
also.
Yeah. So we were like, we need buildings. We need buildings in this game with roofs and doors, you know, like an actual thing. And that was like 8 weeks of work to figure out what is a building. How do you calculate a building?
You start finding yourself in some real deep philosophical holes during this process.
Yeah.
How did you say you contain a space? What is a building? What could you put
What's
a
a
roof
building?
on? You know?
Yeah.
Which is,
and how do you
different from like if you're playing, say, like what's that cute island game on Switch, whatever.
Animal Crossing?
Animal Crossing. Because like in their Animal Crossing, the houses are like you just a house. It's a pre-existing
it's one
house.
asset.
Yeah.
It just already exists, and you can like do some things like change like the door that it has and that kind of stuff, right? But then you go into it, and when you're inside of it, then like that's the space, because now like you're in a black void, you know, like, and you can control that space. And lots of games approach the problem of buildings, right, in that way, which is to say, like, we don't let you construct it, because if you can construct a building, that means you can construct a partial building. And the problems that a partial building has,
or a huge building,
or whatever, right? Like you end up with this land of like really complicated authority problems of so that question of like, what is a building? There's a reason that that's unclear, right? Because like. Because all the game knows about is it's got things at these particular locations on the map, and you have to somehow take that information and be like, is this collection of walls, floors, doors, and pillars and whatever, like, is this a house now? You know,
is it building shaped? Just like, what's the building?
Yeah,
shape.
Yeah, and like one of the stupid things that just caused an infinite number of problems was what happens if you just make like a block of pillars that have no internal space in them. So like if you just put like a 3x3 and you just like pillar, and you just make like a chunk of pillars, that thing alone just was, it was like, for some reason with like how we were calculating the buildings, it was just so hard.
There's a building between all these now, and you're like, there's literally no space, and it's like, but it's a building, and you're like, please,
it's
stop.
like, but there might be, and trying to reconcile like all the different configurations of buildings a player could make, and then with the automatic building calculations, so that they're not causing hitches and making the game slow down. Like, you got to take shortcuts, right? You can't just like check literally every space and every structure.
There was a moment during all this where we were like, should we just jettison building, like piece by piece building? Like, was that actual core to the Crashlands
and actually do like prefabricated whole ass buildings? Which we decided.
Yeah, eventually we were like,
you got to have build mode. You got to have build mode,
because that seems like a little kind of in the DNA.
Well, that other interesting problem with it too was once you've identified that a building exists, right? You can also turn it back into not a building by like removing a wall or whatever, right? And so now the question is, how do you identify a building, right? So like if a building used to exist, then it stopped existing, then it quote unquote exists again. How do we know? How does the game keep track of the fact that there was a building? The player would think this is the same building after they destroy it and kind of rebuild it, right? But especially for things like, because we have characters that are
live in the building.
They live in a building, and so
they respond to the fact that it is a fucking building, right? That it has a roof, that it is like a complete building. They're not like, great, thanks for building me this open air shed. No, they're like, should you build me a cool condo?
So there's just such weird stuff that had to be solved to make that happen. And there were many things like this where
everything was like this. I think that's the point.
Everything was like this,
because what we did is we in addressing all of the, like, I had this huge doc that was all of the player feedback from like aggregated stuff that I put together from Steam, review feedback from critical reviews and stuff that were press related, wherever else. It's huge doc that like where I tried to sum up essentially a high level what the problems were that people were talking about. Right. So one, base building didn't really matter much in the first game. Like 2, you enter this grindy thing where you end up just kind of like rebuilding the same, make your new armor,
gets too samey.
Yep. Too samey after like just the first, 6 to 10 hours. All these things that when we actually went to address them, it turns out that you have to rewind. You have to go all the way back to the base of like, what are you trying to do? How can you do this then in a way that scales? And then how can we do it in a way that allows us as a team to actually be able to build it, whether that's technical or from a scale standpoint. So like in the case of these armor sets, the armor sets are 56 pieces, 56 drawings to support one armor set versus 4 drawings in the original game.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what that said to me also was like, we need to have fewer fucking armor sets because I cannot make that.
There's just no time.
There's no time.
So each armor set has to be more meaningful and like has to last longer, and all of that.
Which was also interesting, right? Because that was part of the problem with the original was kind of just the disposability of everything, right?
Exactly.
So
you start finding these places.
Punching everything up, that also meant that we needed things to be less disposable so that they were more cost effective to create.
Yeah. So you start finding these places where as you're rewinding maybe the feedback you're getting from stuff paired with where you're trying to go just from a technical build out standpoint, you start seeing things that are synergizing or parallel, right? Where you're like, oh, this is great. We can solve this problem and get this benefit at the same time. So then the whole fucking first year of Crashlands 2 dev, we tried multiplayer. Adam said did that for the first like 6 weeks before we were like, that's a whole nother thing we cannot chew off right now.
Well, kind of 2 problems. One is while we're reinventing every other thing in the game, trying to build multiplayer around it when we had so many open questions, because multiplayer, like, it's a lot about like redundancies and streamlining your data formats and compensating for lag and like all these things. But you have to have a really good idea of what the 2 different computers need to communicate to each other to make that work. Well, if you have this many open questions about what is even going on in the game and how the game works, it's really, really hard.
Ultimately, what we learned was that we could figure out how to do multiplayer, but it was going to make every other technical aspect because everything now has to like handle the multiplayer
has
question.
To support that.
How does this handle multiplayer? Right? It was going to make everything else we did from the technical side like 20 to 50% more difficult and costly and time consuming, right? Mm-hmm. But still, like that's potentially a manageable thing. But ultimately, what it really came down to, at least in my opinion, was that it has to make sense for a game to be multiplayer in the first place, right?
Yeah, we couldn't square it with the
couldn't square the design of like Crashlands 2 is this story-driven RPG. As you go about the world, you change things about the world.
You do quests,
you
and the
do
world
quests,
changes.
And the world is changing around you. Like the character is tied to this particular instance of the story of the world. So like, what does it mean to have multiplayer in that context? And there are there's tons of things it could mean, like infinite things it could mean, right? But none of them were very compelling given
enough
their
to have
impact
to overcome
on that
problem.
Yeah, exactly. Compelling enough to overcome just the sheer difficulty then of actually doing it.
Yeah. And like the closest we've seen now is Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of like a game that's a story-driven RPG that has multiplayer. But what's weird about it is like, for the most part, people who have played Baldur's Gate 3 will always recommend don't play it in multiplayer until you've already played it a bunch. Because once you start playing multiplayer in that game, the actual narrative of the game just gets completely obliterated by the chaos caused by your teammates just going off in the world in random directions and talking to random people and just doing stuff. And even to the point where like I saw some playthroughs of that game where it's like there's an important quest item and their friend picked it up and just never said anything about it and didn't even realize they had done it. And then they spent like a couple of hours trying to find that item.
It's in your pocket.
Because one of them picked it up and just stuck it in their pocket unthinkingly, And like these things can really like make that narrative driven experience just really fall flat.
There's a cascade of challenges, I think, that come out of that. This is kind of what we realized. So we pull back on that. And then, the first year was in getting all of that conceptual stuff that I put together, largely actually kind of, I would say, distilling it through then the actual, hey, we need to build this, right? Lens, which largely came down to simplifying stuff again, all the way back up to like, okay, we put all these notes together about how we should do X, Y, or Z. There's build mode. There's these buddies that come with you. You got some pretty grand ideas about like how this is supposed to work. But now that we're at the point where we can implement it, we actually kind of need to
got to make some decisions,
and boil it back down. Like, what's the point? And really figure out. So it was just a really intense period of shaping and reshaping and stuff. And then I think in November of 2021, maybe October, November, something like that, was when we had enough of it put together in a particular form where you could essentially do all of this, like not all the stuff, but like the new stuff that was so core to how the whole loop was going to work, right? And playtesting.
We basically had the first layer of everything, right? Like we didn't have quests, but we did have
quests. We did have pets. Fishing.
Yeah. So, we had the first creature, the first armor set. We had a couple of weapons. We had some tools. We had like
the map editor,
crafting and
the buddy. You could do these research to get your recipes and stuff. So
so the foundation, everything was there. We had in that first year we had answered most of those questions, and unfortunately, one of the biggest answers at that time that we got to all of our questions was, this game is way too fucking big and we can't make it. Because all the cool stuff we wanted to do really oriented around authored content, which is like...
basically, I guess the short of it is we came away from that play test and had, I think, like 90 items.
We had like 3 months worth of notes of things to change.
Yeah, but the reason that it was 3 months worth of stuff to do is because of the shape of how our studio was at the time, as far as like how content gets made and implemented.
Yeah, it was basically the loop between saying I want to add this or make this change, having that change exist, and then being able to give feedback on it and iterate.
Yeah, so now like imagine
really
yourself in this position. Yeah, because like you've got a glimpse of the thing that you're trying to make. You got like a shard of it, and you're like, this is.
You can tell it would work, like it would be good.
I think this is gonna work. Everyone's excited about this, and then you try to imagine putting it all together, and you're like, well, I can't. What do you do?
It's just too big. So that was where we took a step back and we're like, okay,
why is this
hard? Now? Why is this hard? Right. So, and like we talked about earlier in the episode, me as the game programmer, I was the bottleneck. Where like if Sam, like even though Sam was still doing spine animations and stuff, if we wanted a new creature in the game, Sam couldn't just add that creature just because he made the spine animation. He would still have to hand the animation over to me with some instructions of how it's going to work and all that. And then I would have to spend some time programming. So, we're saving time with me coding the animation part, but I still had to code up the creature, right? And if that's true with everything, then you've just got this hard speed limit on just how quickly things can get in. And also, while
which was
those things
better
are
than
being
original
added,
Crashlands, but still,
it's better. Yeah.
still not good enough. Yeah.
But also, the game systems were serviceable at that point, but nowhere near complete. And most of them still didn't exist. Like Sam saying, no pets, no fishing, no farming, all that stuff. And so we had to kind of like
and
take
the
a step
importance
back
of that was
figure that out.
is specifically that then you can't be implementing known things while also trying to push the new stuff forward.
Let alone making edits to known things, which there will always be, right? Thousands of.
Yeah. So often the solution that a studio or company would have to this problem is hire more programmers. Just hire more programmers.
Which we thought about, but very seriously.
Yep. Then we were like, that's just kicking the can. Because if we ever want to do more, then we just need even more programmers. And also, people don't just solve problems; they also create problems, largely communication problems. You need to talk a lot more about who's doing what and when, and you need to have much more robust plans and all that. And as soon as you reach a team of a certain size, you start to have people whose full job is just managing the communication channels between people.
And onboarding new people, even very proficient ones, onto an existing project is extremely expensive. It takes months, which means that you don't actually see a benefit to the performance of the team until the onboarding stuff has gotten far enough. And during that whole time, Seth would be the one doing onboarding, which means that's basically like now we have this, we were guaranteed a huge period of time where nothing is happening. It's very slow. And gambling on the hope that on the other side of that, we now have 2x-ish, the power that we had, which is never what you actually get because, like we said, the management layers that then are required make it so that neither...
It might be like a 1.5x or something.
It'll be a boost, definitely, but it won't be proportional, right?
Yeah. So look at the scope of the game, though. We're like, that's not enough. Like, we need like a 10x. We need like 10x production speed in order to make this stuff. So we took a step back and we were like, we need a new tool. So without getting into the details, because we've talked about this tool a lot.
Yeah. So if you go back to prior episodes, if you want to hear all the details about this stuff, we get into it quite a bit.
But we made this tool called the Game Changer, and it took about 6 months to build, and we did not really do anything else in the game at that time. So Sam did a bunch of other stuff, like he was kind of prepping some art, and he worked on the opening cutscene and lots of other stuff. But we just agreed, like, in order for us to make this game, we actually need to stop making this game for 6 months.
Which was also a big gamble because we imagined a solution, but it didn't exist yet to try it to see if it would work. We had to make it over 6 months, which is a long time, to find out if it was a good idea. And this is the kind of like risky stuff that you have to do sometimes. But and a lot of, depending on context and your team and who's running things and where the money's coming from, how much runway you have and all that kind of stuff, sometimes you just can't. Nobody will let you do it, or it's impossible because you run out of money or whatever. And then you're stuck being like, so we were very fortunate that we had enough runway still at that time to be able to take that gamble and say, we think we have to do this, because if we don't, then our option is basically some other kind of pivot and make Crashlands 2 something else, change how we're
something that we can make in 2 years or a year or whatever. So once we had the Game Changer up and running, then we had this big conversion process where we had to like take all the existing stuff we had already done and make it compatible with this new tool. And it was weird because having this tool kind of made things happen backwards compared to what we were used to. Because the idea with this tool is kind of like we can like pre-describe types of things, like, oh, this is a weapon, this is a creature, blah, blah, blah. And once we've decided all the different things that a creature can have, like what's its sprite, what does it sound like, how does it move, once we can describe that stuff in the Game Changer, then we can make 50 creatures with the Game Changer in an afternoon, right? We won't have the art for them, but they'll just be ready to go. Yeah, they'll be ready to go, mechanically working, behaving, interacting with things in the world. And like once Sam is done making the art, he could just plug it right in himself, and the creature's just there, right? And so suddenly it took the brakes off in terms of the only thing slowing us down was just our ability to actually decide what to do or to create the art asset, and it's not getting into the game is now just nearly instantaneous.
Yep.
So it's all the other parts are now the hard parts, which is where we wanted it to be. And once the game changer was done and we kind of got that conversion step done, then we went back to that big list of things, that list that was like a 3-month long list of stuff from our playthrough. And I think it took like 2 weeks or something to go through that list and get everything in.
Yeah.
Well, it probably wasn't even that. And
I think our best guess at the time was something like 2 months after we did all of that. We were confident we had already caught up in the sense that like the 6 months that we had spent, that we had quote unquote
we got
lost,
it back.
right? That we already got it back within the first like 2 months. But then every day after that, we were we were operating at something like 10x what we were before when it came to that part of the production process.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's been very interesting having this tool because then it kind of makes it so that the only thing in our own way is ourselves now, right? Like however fast we can make stuff, that's just how fast it goes into the game. There's no like implementation step blocking it really. It's just, it can be there. And we even had like a couple months back as we're working on some of the new stuff in the new biomes. There was like 1 week where we added like 150 items to the game. And like, yeah, they're all placeholder items, like waiting for art and more integration. But it's like, okay, well, like we need all these resources, we need all these recipes and components and all these things, and let's just block it out. Let's just create those like prefabs basically, so that they're ready to just be plugged in. And so then we can actually jump in and start playing the game and interacting with those things and try to start to get a sense of how it feels, right? And we could just do that in like a week. So we've been just on that journey now, where like essentially the first half of the time that we were working on Crashlands 2 was answering a lot of questions to say, how do we take everything that was great about Crashlands and take it to not just the next level, but like 10 more levels.
Yeah, different and take the things that were bad and make them really good, right?
Yeah, or just get rid of them. Or the case maybe. Either way. So you can kind of see that we've taken the care to try to have that depth happen just all over the place, whether it's like, how do pets work? What's it like to like chop down a tree? What was annoying about crafting stuff in the first game and like interacting with your workstations, or like variety of play styles, or how do we convey cinematic moments and stories? You know, like all like we try like every single thing that we could think of. We rethought from the ground up of how to make that much better.
And this is it's not a perfect game, and you know I don't think we'll ever build one that no one could.
Yeah, it's not a thing you get to make.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You know, I think it's still got it has opinions about stuff. So you know, there's going to be some stuff that I know people are going to bump up against here and there.
Yeah, of course.
To do. But I think I mean by and large, I'm really excited that people finally get to play it, if like at all. I mean, Jesus Christ, been 4 years. That's nice, you know, because
yeah. And so in terms of kind of where we're at then and where we're going. So the demo is out, and the demo is kind of locked in from like I think a month and a half ago or something. So development is just continuing in the background while the demo is just lurking over there for people to play. We are blazing through, adding more biomes, more creatures, more stories, and we're really trying to get this game to a point where kind of like it leads to a very cool and epic, like ultimate, you know, big meaningful cinematic moment, which does mean like, you know, just taking a lot of care with the characters and the stories and trying to, you know, like working hard to create these meaningful experiences in the game. And not just like narratively, but also from a gameplay perspective, like, you know, 30 hours in, how do we give the player something or show the player something where they're just like, oh shit, that's so cool. I've never seen that before. Right. And so we're always trying to optimize towards just like keeping things really fresh and interesting. And the game changer is, you know, just one of those things that lets us play with things and experiment and do stuff like that. So
I think it's safe to say that, in order to make this game, we had to rebuild the entire everything about how we do and approach everything. It's not even exaggerating. It's been a ridiculous 4 years.
The tools we're using, the way we do everything, and the way we collaborate with each other, just
and we've been working remotely the whole time because, you know, there was a pandemic.
Yeah,
as we started working on this game.
Yeah, I'm very proud of everybody on the team. And all the contractors who have popped in here and there, touch stuff. I feel like everyone's done a bang up job, really embracing the amount of change that we've requested. A lot of transformations has been required in order to do this. So
the people that we've hired on our team are very good with whiplash, where we're just like, so anyway, we're changing everything now. And they're like, okay.
The pivots are they're still significant, but they're less intense than they used to be.
They're less
pivots
frequent.
Used to be like, they were frequent and they were like, I guess we're throwing the game away and starting over. It was like that kind of stuff in the earlier days, so, but nothing stays the same for very long.
Nope.
Yeah. So that's about all the time we have for this episode. We typically go like an hour on these episodes, but we kind of overshot a little bit because we wanted to, kind of do a little reminiscing about kind of what we've been up to. And
it's a big moment, Gotta give it the time it needs.
Yeah, and so big thanks to everybody who's checking out the demo. Hope you're having a great time with it. We have hundreds of podcast episodes. So if you want to kind of hear more about what development has been like, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net and you can just kind of work your way back through. Oftentimes in these episodes, because sometimes we're just kind of on the grind and we're just it's like this week we just did like 50 more things, and next week we did 50 more things. We don't talk about Crashlands 2 in every episode. We often talk about industry stuff, like things that are going on in like larger game studios.
Just to answer people's questions.
Answering questions.
Random nonsense.
Like random life stories that are kind of interesting and goofy. So we kind of just do a little bit of everything. But hope everybody enjoyed listening. Thanks again for checking out the demo. Give us some feedback. I think we have a feedback button on the demo. So if you're enjoying it, you can drop us a line. And that's all the time we have. So we'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa Costa, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you could just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And of course, if you've enjoyed the demo, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list, which will help boost the game's visibility when we go to launch it, and it'll help make sure that it is a success. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.